In the heart of every medieval village, tucked between stone cottages, market squares, and winding dirt roads, there was always the forge, a place of heat, fire, and creation. This was the realm of the blacksmith, a master of metal, a creator of tools, weapons, and objects that shaped daily life and warfare alike. Unlike the peasants who tilled the fields or the merchants who traded goods, the blacksmith held a unique place in the social fabric. He was essential, skilled, and respected, yet his work was relentless and dangerous. To understand what life was like as a medieval blacksmith, one must step into the glow of the forge, hear the clang of hammer on anvil, and witness the rhythm of a craft that balanced art, science, and raw labour. A blacksmith's day began early, often before the sun had climbed high enough to illuminate the village. The forge was already alive with heat. Bellows pumped air into roaring fires, smoke curled upward through thatched roofs, and the smell of burning coal and molten metal filled the air. The blacksmith had to be awake, alert, and skilled in managing these elements, for the fire was both a tool and a potential hazard. A single misstep could cause severe burns, ignite the building, or ruin an expensive piece of iron. The blacksmith's life demanded constant attention, precision, and stamina. There was little room for distraction. The forge required respect as much as skill. The tools of the trade were deceptively simple yet essential. Hammers of varying weight, tongs to hold glowing metal, chisels, anvils, and bellows formed the core of the workshop. Each tool had a purpose and a story. The hammer, for instance, was an extension of the blacksmith's hand, capable of shaping steel into a delicate blade or a heavy plowshare. Tongs allowed the smith to manipulate molten metal without injury, while the anvil provided a solid surface against which metal could be hammered, folded, and hardened. To the untrained eye, these objects were mundane, but in the hands of a master, they transformed raw iron into objects that could defend a castle, plough a field, or feed a family. Blacksmiths did not limit themselves to a single type of work. Their craft was as versatile as it was demanding. Some days were spent forging weapons for knights and soldiers, swords, axes, maces, and polearms designed for battle. Each weapon had to be balanced, tempered, and durable, often tailored to the preferences of a particular noble or warrior. A sword, for example, was not just a piece of metal, it was a symbol of power, a tool of defense, and sometimes an heirloom. Creating it required meticulous heating, hammering, quenching, and tempering, often taking days or even weeks to perfect. Mistakes could render the weapon useless, and in a world defined by warfare, failure carried serious consequences. Other days, the blacksmith would turn his attention to armour. Shields, helmets, chainmail, and plate armour were essential for both soldiers and wealthy villagers. Forging armour demanded patience and skill. It was heavier and more complex than most weapons, yet every curve and rivet mattered. The blacksmith had to ensure it was protective, yet flexible enough to allow movement. Chainmail alone, composed of thousands of interlinked rings, required hours of painstaking labour. One weak link could compromise an entire piece of armour, potentially costing a life in battle. The forge was therefore a place where the stakes were always high, and every creation was a test of skill. Yet blacksmiths were not solely makers of war. Much of their work served the everyday needs of their community. They forged horseshoes to protect the hooves of workhorses and knights' mounts, ploughs and sickles for farmers, nails and hinges for carpenters and builders, and knives, pots, and cauldrons for kitchens. Even seemingly mundane objects demanded craftsmanship. A poorly forged plough could collapse under the strain of a field, and a weak horseshoe could cripple a horse. The blacksmith's influence extended into every aspect of village life, making him indispensable. His forge was the heartbeat of the community, a place where survival, work, and progress intersected. Apprenticeship was a central part of the blacksmith's world. Young boys, often from the village or neighbouring towns, would enter the forge as apprentices, sometimes as early as 7 or 8 years old. Their first days were filled with menial tasks, tending the fire, fetching water, cleaning the floor, and observing the master at work. Over time, they learned the intricate techniques of shaping metal, understanding its properties, and mastering the dangerous dance of fire and iron. Apprenticeship could last years, requiring patience, obedience, and endurance. Only those who demonstrated skill, dedication, and trustworthiness would eventually become journeymen or masters themselves. Knowledge was passed carefully, sometimes guarded jealously, as the art of blacksmithing was both practical and highly valued. The forge was also a place of learning and experimentation. A blacksmith constantly tested new techniques, alloys, and designs. How would a certain mixture of iron and carbon respond to heat? Could a sword be tempered to balance sharpness with durability? Could a hinge or lock be strengthened to resist theft or breakage? This trial and error approach was dangerous, yet it allowed blacksmiths to refine their craft, improve their tools, and innovate. They were, in many ways, both artisans and scientists, blending observation, creativity, and skill to achieve mastery. Life as a blacksmith was physically demanding. Hours spent hammering heavy metal, bending iron rods, or operating bellows took a toll on the body. Muscles ached, backs strained, and hands were calloused and scarred. Cuts, burns, and injuries were common, and even a minor wound could become infected in the unsanitary conditions of the Middle Ages. Blacksmiths had to be strong, resilient, and constantly vigilant. Despite the hardships, the work carried a sense of pride in accomplishment. There was tangible satisfaction in seeing a glowing lump of metal transformed into a tool, weapon, or piece of armour that could endure for generations. The blacksmith's social role was equally complex. While highly respected for their skill, blacksmiths often occupied an ambiguous position in society. They were essential to both peasants and nobility, supplying tools and weapons alike, yet their work involved fire, iron, and blood, elements often associated with danger and superstition. Some villagers regarded the forge with awe or fear, believing blacksmiths had mystical powers to shape fate through metal. In many ways, the blacksmith straddled the line between artisan, labourer, and keeper of secret knowledge. Economic life for a blacksmith was tied closely to the needs of the community and the fluctuations of wealth and warfare. A village at peace might require more farming tools than swords, while times of conflict would shift demand toward weapons and armour. Prices varied, and blacksmiths often bartered their wares for goods, services, or coin. The successful blacksmith had to be not only a skilled craftsman, but also a shrewd businessman, balancing supply, demand, and the needs of his patrons. Guild membership, when available, could provide support, training, and regulation, but not all blacksmiths had access to these networks, and life could be precarious for those working independently. Despite the labour and danger, the forge was also a place of community and mentorship. Apprentices became part of the blacksmith's household, learning not only metalworking but also discipline, patience, and problem solving. Journeymen often travelled to other towns to gain experience, and masters shared techniques with trusted peers. Stories, myths, and traditions were intertwined with the craft, preserving the cultural memory of blacksmithing across generations. The forge was thus both a workplace and a centre of knowledge, a place where craft, culture, and life intersected. Seasons and natural forces shaped the blacksmith's work. Winter brought challenges, fires had to be maintained, fuel rationed, and metal stored carefully to prevent cracking from cold. Summer heat combined with the forge's fires could be unbearable. Rain could disrupt the transport of metal or affect work on outdoor projects. Yet blacksmiths adapted, learning to manage resources, plan ahead, and work with the cycles of nature. Their work required foresight, discipline, and resilience, reflecting the rhythms of life in a medieval village. Blacksmithing was not just practical, it carried symbolic and cultural weight. Weapons and armour were imbued with prestige and status. A finely crafted sword could signify a knight's honour, a shield's emblem could proclaim a family's legacy, and a masterfully forged plough could secure a farmer's livelihood. In myths and legends, blacksmiths often occupied central roles, from the divine forge of Hephaestus to the legendary Wayland the Smith, reflecting the enduring fascination with the power of fire and metal. In this sense, blacksmiths were not merely labourers, they were creators of both physical tools and cultural meaning. Finally, life as a medieval blacksmith demanded endurance, creativity, and constant adaptation. The forge was a place of heat, sparks, and smoke, but also of innovation, artistry, and community. Blacksmiths shaped swords that defended kingdoms, ploughs that fed villages, and tools that built civilizations. Their work was essential to daily life and to the broader sweep of history. Through fire and hammer, sweat and skill, blacksmiths left a legacy in iron and steel that still captures the imagination today,